So each year that I teach gross anatomy, whenever we do the head and neck anatomy section, there's a very common question that I get every single time by multiple students, and that has to do with eye movements. Now, if you have been paying attention, what you will notice is that the eye movements, how they are stated in an anatomical course or from an anatomical source, such as a book, the eye movements that are stated there do not correlate with how you test for function of those same eye muscles during clinical testing during the Hint exam. All right. And specifically, what I'm talking about is when you tell somebody to track your finger with their eye and you do the H movement, right? When you tell them to go all the way to the side, go up, down, come back to neutral, then go to the other side, go up and down, right? So you're doing the H movement. The movements for that don't correlate to the movements that you see stated for the individual eye muscles, okay? So let's give you an example. When you're doing clinical testing, let's say if we're talking about my right eyeball, okay? My right eyeball, if I make it move to the right, which is abduction, right? Abduction of that eye, and then I tell the person to elevate up to this corner. If a person is not able to do that, that tells me that there is impaired functioning of their superior rectus muscle, all right? Superior rectus muscle. And then if I go down, it tells me if they're not able to do that, then it would tell me that it's a problem with the inferior rectus muscle, okay? And then we go over here, and then we go all the way to this side. And now when we're on this side, I tell the person to go up like this. And in this corner, what am I testing? I'm testing the inferior oblique muscle. And then if I go down, I'm testing the superior oblique muscle, okay? But if you look at any kind of anatomical source, they will tell you that the superior rectus doesn't make your right eye go up and to the right like that, right? What does it do? It elevates the eye and makes it go this way. It makes it do this kind of thing, right? What gives? All right. So nobody's lying to you. Neither source is incorrect. Okay. If you want to understand why this discrepancy is there, we need to talk about a few things first. We need to talk about some geometry. We need to talk about muscle force vectors, and we need to talk about axes of rotation. Now, if that sounds a little bit scary, don't get freaked out. I'm going to break it all down for you, okay? So, all right. First thing let's talk about is axes. Should I talk about that first? Yeah, this is a good foundation to get. So, let's talk about axes of rotation. So, let's say, for example, I'm going to pick up this pen that I have over here, okay? So, this pen is going to serve as my axis. Now, let's talk about like the globe, the planet, right, that we live on right now. It rotates, right? It rotates. Let's say the globe is right here. It's rotating around like this, okay? And as it's rotating around, all right, there's an axis around which it rotates. That axis is a line that I can draw that goes through the North Pole, through the center of the Earth, and out to the south, through the South Pole, right? So that's the axis around which that globe is rotating, okay? Now, so let's pretend my head is my right eyeball, okay? And these are the axes now that are going to be going through this right eyeball. The first axis we're going to look at is an axis that, let's say, it goes through my right ear, through my head, and out my other ear, okay? We're going to call this the horizontal axis, okay? And so the horizontal axis, because it's oriented in this horizontal fashion, okay, think about what is the movement that is going to occur to your head if it rotates around that axis, okay? Just think about it and go ahead and act it out right now. The movement that's going to occur is this movement. A yes, no nodding movement, right? Because that's my head rotating around this axis that's going through, okay? Now let's look at an axis that goes like this, up and down. Let's say it's going through the top of my head and out the bottom of my head, okay? What would it look like for my head to rotate around that axis? That would look like this, okay? That's the vertical axis, okay? So that's the same thing as for my right eyeball, that would be adduction, abduction, adduction, abduction. The rotation around the horizontal axis would be elevation, depression, right? Okay, so we got a horizontal axis, we got a vertical axis. What's the last one that we're missing? We're missing this axis, okay? Boom. This axis right here is going to be the transverse axis. And when we look at this one, we're going to be looking at rotation that happens like what? Like this, okay? For this kind of movement, we're going to use the top of the head for anatomical purposes and describing movement. We're going to use the top of the head as the relative point. This is the North Pole. And then we're going to say that when it rotates this way, medially, right? The top of my head is pointing medially. This is medial rotation. When it points in the other direction, that's going to be lateral rotation, all right? So we got this and this. So that covers the three axes by which we can define movement of a sphere or rotation of a spherical object, okay? All right. So now that's cool. That's a way we can describe things in space, and we could break it down mathematically and do a bunch of cool things to it. But in real life, right, movements of the eyeball don't happen in pure isolation, rarely. They happen in pure isolation of just elevation, depression, this, that, and that, right? So that's why when you look at what is the movement of superior rectus is going to produce a combination of it's not going to just do elevation. That's its primary thing. But it's going to do, when superior rectus by itself contracts, it's going to do this, okay? That's the right eyeball. Superior rectus is going to pull it like this, okay? So notice that was a combination of elevation, that was a little bit of medial rotation, and that was also a slight amount of adduction. That was a combination of those three movements, okay? So why is it that the superior rectus in isolation would do that, but when we test it clinically, we're looking for it to go like this? What's that about? Let's break it down. Okay, so we talked about the axis of rotation. Now we got to look at some geometry. So we're going to look at a completely different view now. All right, so this right here is a diagram, okay? Now, the nose is right in the middle. The nose is right in the middle. This is the right eyeball. This is the left eyeball, okay? And what I want you guys to know is this, all right? So it's kind of faint. Let me see if I can make it darker for you so you can see. This right here, what I'm drawing in green, this is the axis, is a center line. Okay, I'm just going to say center line that is going through the orbit, all right? So remember, your eyeball is sitting in its socket, which is the orbit, the orbital cavity, okay? The nasal cavity is right here in the middle. Your temple is going to be out here. So this is a triangular shape that is showing you the way that the orbit is oriented, okay? As it's sitting in your skull. Notice that it's oriented out this way, okay? And with the other side, I'm going to make this a little darker for you, is also oriented out that way. And what we have effectively between these two green lines is a 45-degree angle that they're creating, okay? And then these red lines over here on the outside, this indicates the lateral wall of these orbital cavities. Those lateral walls of the orbital cavity are oriented at a 90-degree angle to each other, okay? The medial walls are going to be here, and they're going to be in line parallel to each other. Altogether, this is creating a triangle here to make the two orbits, and then the green line is bisecting each one of those triangles in the middle to meet the center of your eyeball, okay? Another thing we have to note, however, is that the direction to which the eyeball is oriented, or where the pupil is pointing, okay? The pupil is pointing straight ahead, okay? Our orbits are oriented like this, but our gaze is oriented like this, straight ahead, all right? So the axis that indicates the direction to which our gaze is oriented is this purple line that I'm drawing in here, okay? Now this is very important, okay? Now, this, we're gonna pretend that this is the right eyeball, okay? Now, we're gonna pretend that this over here is indicating the front of the eye. So notice how I'm gonna place it so that it's oriented like that, okay? Now, the muscles, we're going to continue using the superior rectus as an example. The superior rectus and all the muscles for that matter are all starting back here at the apex of this triangle, where the common tendinous ring is that they all attach to, all right? So the superior rectus, so since they're all coming from here, that means that all the muscles are oriented to the orbit, okay? They're not necessarily oriented to the gaze of our eye, which is this orange line, okay? They're oriented to this green line, okay? So when the superior rectus attaches to this eyeball, okay? Let me get the view over here, probably a little better. When the superior rectus is attached to that eyeball, it's attaching to it like this, okay? Which means that when that muscle pulls, when that muscle contracts, right, it's going to pull this way, right? And it's going to pull the eyeball towards the apex of that triangle, okay? You can't get a good appreciation from it from your view, so let me get you a better view. This is the eyeball, gazing straight ahead. You see where the apex is? I'm going to place my finger like that, right here. And we're going to pull in that direction. So notice what happens. The eye is lifting up, but it also turned a little bit this way, and it turned a little bit that way. Okay, let me give you a better view. This is the eyeball. This is the right eyeball. This is my superior rectus, okay? Lateral side, medial side, all right? Superior rectus pulls. The eyeball moves like that. So you see how that horizontal line now shifted a little bit that way. That's the medial rotation. And you also, if you were looking from the top down, you would notice how the surface of the eyeball, instead of being here, it turns slightly in, okay? That's going to be the adduction. So altogether, that's what's happening there. All right, so we got this top-down view again. Now what I want you guys to know is this. So we talked about the superior rectus, right? Moving the eye like that. Now, when we do the clinical testing, we tell the person to move their eye all the way out into abduction. So what is that going to look like? The eye is going to turn like that, okay? Now notice that the superior rectus and the eye, okay? The superior rectus and the eye are now in line with each other. The gaze, the direction of the gaze, and the force vector for the superior rectus are in line with each other, okay? So now when you ask the person to look up from this abducted position, the superior rectus, when it pulls, it's going to do a pure elevation of the eye, okay? A pure elevation of the eye. And there is no other muscle that is going to be in position to create that elevation of the eye when the eye is already fully abducted out here, Okay, there's no other extraocular muscle that is in a position to produce the elevation that the superior rectus produces from here. Now, from this fully abducted position, right, not only can we test the superior rectus, but we could also test the inferior rectus, right? So imagine the inferior rectus sitting down here, right, and pulls the eye into depression. And it'll be just isolating the inferior rectus to do that movement, okay? Likewise, if we go all the way here, right, to adduction, right, this is now where we could test the superior oblique and the inferior oblique in isolation. Why? Because right now, the superior oblique, remember that it was running up the medial wall of the orbit. It runs up the medial wall of the orbit like this. There's a little trochlea over here that has it attached to this top left corner of this orbit, and then it makes a sudden turn this way, okay? So that the force vector is effectively like this, and it's pulling the eyeball in that way, okay? So what is that going to look like? If I'm just sitting in neutral gaze position like this, right, where my gaze is oriented directly forward, that would be the superior oblique like this and pulls it like that, okay? So that what you get effectively is you get a medial rotation, you get a little bit of a abduction, and then you get depression like that. But how are we going to test it? We're going to tell the person to look all the way this way, okay? And then when they're here, the superior oblique is still sitting like this. Now, when I ask the person to look down, the superior oblique is in the perfect orientation, in the perfect position to cause a pure depression of that eyeball, okay? A pure depression of that eyeball. Likewise, you have the inferior oblique, which is going to come down here, right? And when you're here, when it pulls, it's going to pull up. It's going to pull you into an elevation, okay? So you move here to test the inferior oblique. Look up. Test the superior oblique. Look down, right? Turn the eye this way. Superior rectus. Look up. Inferior rectus pulls to look down, okay? So you see how once you have that fundamental understanding, you can see the difference, right? There's one situation which is just everyday use of your eyeball, and sure, there's going to be a combination of movements. But when we're doing the clinical testing, we're essentially we're aligning the gaze with the axis of the orbit to isolate certain muscle vectors, right? So that we can isolate specific muscles. And so realize that at the end of the day, you're pretty much just testing 3 cranial nerves, right? So if I'm asking the person to look all the way out, let's say, again, using the right eyeball as an example, if I'm asking the person to look all the way out into abduction, that's just testing cranial nerve 6, okay? The abducent nerve. So that's going to be testing the lateral rectus. And then when we go and we ask them to look up, that's testing the superior rectus, which is ocular motor. If they look down, that's also ocular motor. We come back to the middle, then we go all the way to this side, that's ocular motor. Now we're going to look up to superior oblique. I'm sorry, that's inferior oblique. We're going to look down to superior oblique, and now that's where we're going to test cranial nerve 4, right? The trochlear nerve. And that's it. If that makes sense, cool. If it doesn't make sense, then ask me a question in the comments or shoot me a message. All right? Peace. Gross anatomy is one of the most difficult subjects in the world. Luckily, it doesn't have to be. Anatomy is one of those subjects that needs constant verbal and visual repetition in order to get good at. What better way to reinforce this information than with the scientifically validated method of drawing? Neuroscience has shown us that we retain information better when we physically draw it out. That is why the Gross Anatomy Study Strategy Workbook is designed to walk you through all the layers of the musculoskeletal system, allowing you to draw the muscles into place. This is excellent for reinforcing muscle attachments, bony landmarks, muscle names, and actions. This will save you tons of time from mind-numbing tactics such as repetitive flashcards or passively listening to boring lectures. With this strategy, you can actually begin to enjoy studying again and have a much better way to retrieve the information. Order a copy of the Gross Anatomy Study Strategy today at the link below so you can spend less time being stressed and more time being blessed.